Welcome back to the Show My Scars podcast. I'm your host, Derek Duker. Today I bring you a conversation with Alexa Ochoa. If that last name sounds familiar, I had her father, Orlando, on a few episodes back. At the time, I was unaware his daughter had a career in the mental health field. Alexa has a master's in social work and currently works in family therapy with those at risk of having their children being placed outside of their homes. During this episode, we'll talk about Alexa's career path, what led her into the field of mental health, resources and strategies she uses to deal with loneliness, burnout, and emotional overwhelm, and much more. So, here it is, my conversation with Alexa Ochoa. Greatly appreciate you coming on here to talk about, your career in mental health and everything. Obviously we just talked to your dad a few episodes ago and really enjoyed that. And now we got to know each other a little bit better, and then I found out what you do for a living, I had to have you on. We were talking just before we started recording about what drew you specifically into the field of mental health and social work. And you mentioned a moment where you were sitting there with your family trying to decide what to do. Can you go back over that story for us?
Yeah. So when I graduated college in 2018, I had a degree in psychology. So with psychology, you need either more schooling, or you need to be super focused on research or just something more. And so I graduated, and my sister-in-law, she was actually at my graduation. We had hung out a few days before. And I just remember telling her, I have no clue what to do. I don't know what I want to do. I just know that bills have to be paid and life costs money. So my brother had actually just graduated from the State Trooper Academy in Texas. And so he was gone a lot. And so she's like, come live with us. We have an extra room. You can help me with, at the time, I just had one nephew. She's like, you can help me with your nephew, and then we'll figure it out from there. And so I knew that I always wanted to go back to Texas because that's where my family's from prior to the military. So it was kind of a good opportunity to get back to Texas, but also, have some stability and not have to be extremely worried about, paying rent or finding an apartment. So I moved in with them. And then I remember sitting on the couch one night in their house and just saying, I still don't know what I want to do, but, I'm looking up counseling for veterans or working with veterans. And I think even at the time I had considered working with youth in foster care, and a school not too far from them came up. So I'm like, should I apply? I don't really know what all this entails. I don't have anybody in the field in my family. So it's I don't really know what it entails, but it's something that I'm passionate about. And so I applied to the University of Texas at Arlington, got accepted, and kind of started my journey through the mental health field. While I was doing that, I was working at Target and I was volunteering. I ended up volunteering for CASA. It stands for Texas Court Appointed Special Advocate. And so you kind of advocate for the child in foster care cases. So I did that for a while and then finished my degree, and now I'm here.
You mentioned that you moved to Texas to figure life out, and you kind of went over it a little bit there, but what did that time teach you about patience and self-discovery?
It taught me a lot. It taught me that I needed way more patience than I had.
Yeah, definitely.
I was, sort of a high achiever in school throughout the years. I always had straight A's, B's, school came very easy to me. And then even with sports in college, it wasn't super rigorous for me personally, just the academic side of it. And so I was used to kind of just having things figured out. I knew I was going to graduate high school. I knew I was going to go to college. I knew I was going to play softball. And so it kind of taught me that life happens and you don't know what's going to happen, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard, because there were a lot of times to where I felt lonely or thankfully I had my brother, my sister-in-law, and then my nephews with me. And then my parents constantly would come down to visit, but it's different when you feel alone in something. And so I felt alone in figuring out life. I didn't have a life partner. I didn't have a ton of friends. So physically I wasn't alone, and with my family I wasn't alone, but it felt that way. And so it kind of just taught me to trust that life happens the way it's meant to, and things are going to be hard, but we can do hard things.
That struggle of feeling alone in what you're doing, I was one of the first ones in my family to go to college, and
Mhm.
I was going into a field like all but one of my brothers wound up in like some sort of like blue collar field. And
Mhm.
I, of course, I went into journalism, and now I still do stuff that none of them understand. If they
Yeah.
ask about it, that's a hard place to be, because through most of my career in sports journalism, I was looking to kind of strangers to be my mentor. And that's kind of a scary thing, to put your trust out there like that and trust somebody that's
Yeah.
not family. Was there a moment like that for you that kind of illustrates that struggle, and like how did you overcome or manage that?
Yeah, I would honestly say I mean, I'm 29 now, and even now still, like, we are trying to figure out, I'm engaged, and so we'll be married in September of 2026. But even now, having a life partner and having a career and being better off financially than I was back then, it's still hard because it's like, how do you decide? Like right now, we're selling our house and we are hoping to move closer to my parents, but then it's like that whole process can be very stressful and overwhelming. Of like, have to sell my house before I can buy a new house. Well, do we take the risk and move in with our parents? We're blessed to even have that opportunity, but still feeling like there's no right answer. And so just thinking right now, I can't remember one specific moment, but I think my 20s have just kind of been a period of like, you get knocked down, you get back up, you get knocked down, you get back up. And so just learning that it's okay and that people struggle, and that, for me, something that has always been something to lean on is my family. But I don't come from a family that my parents can like buy me a nice high rise in downtown Dallas, or, give me the down payment for my house. They support me in every other way possible. Like throughout college, my dad would be like, "Hey, I just found you 5 scholarships. I need you to write the essay, but then we'll figure out how to fill out the rest of the application. We'll get it submitted." Or, my mom, she, helped a little bit with FAFSA for my dad. He went back to school. So she's like, "I got the FAFSA, sit down, we'll figure it out." And so through every moment in my life, for me, it's been leaning on my community. So whatever that looks like for you, for people, it's different. I have a strong family. If you don't, finding those friends, there are tons and tons of resources out there. Every county should have like a community mental health center, and they can help you with college applications. They can help you with your mental health, medication, like finding those resources and really leaning into them, because not everyone's privileged to have the family to lean on. And then just knowing that you can lean on yourself. Like, you're stronger than you think you are, and you can do it.
That's been one of the hardest things for me, is like the personal affirmation or the positive
Mm-hmm.
affirmations for myself. And I don't have any really good advice other than to just keep saying them. But do you have any advice for how to get those to sink in?
I think knowing that sometimes the affirmations aren't enough. Like sometimes we're gonna feel defeated and we're gonna feel like the only person in the world that's struggling, or like nobody understands us. And truly, like, you have those people, yes, that like your best friend who is like the one person in the world that gets you, or your partner that is the only one that truly knows you. But at the end of the day, being you is individual to you, and you're the only one that's in your mind. You're the only one that knows what you're thinking at all times. And so, just, I think for me, it's a faith or a hope in that I can do this. And if I can't, it's okay. And I'll figure it out. But it's hard. It's really, really hard because there's not like a textbook. And then, of course, when you bring in mental health and you're clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety or ADHD. For me, it's ADHD. You can probably tell just by the way I talk. It's like my mind is always going, and it's like a million different places at once. Also, acknowledging like those diagnoses are very real, and it's not, nowadays people will say like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so anxious." And like, yes, we all feel anxious at times, but there's a difference between being clinically diagnosed with anxiety and feeling anxious. And so remembering that, like, if you're that person that is diagnosed, or even that isn't but is struggling, and it's, not within the realm of what's normal or typical is a better word, that's a whole nother beast that's going to make things 10 times more difficult. Or if you don't come from a family that's supportive, like, you're having to work 10 times harder, and you can do it, and you still can come out on the other end.
After you got your master's in social work, can you walk us through your career path and like tell us what you learned at each stop and how that's shaped both you and the approaches that you serve?
Yeah. So my very first job was at a community mental health organization in the county that I lived in. I was making like less than minimum wage, working a lot. I had like 12 clients at a time, but it was intense case management. So it was with kids that were at risk of being taken from their homes. And so my job was to figure out what resources their families needed to get them to be healthy and stable enough to stay in their home. I was broke. I was barely making enough to pay my rent, but it was such a fast paced, critical environment that I learned a lot of what I know now. And the supervisor that I was with, she was an amazing mentor. And as therapists, you graduate and you take your test to become licensed, but you're not given really any kind of direction on like, how do I sit down and start a session, or how do I build a rapport with this client to make them feel safe with me? You're kind of just thrown out there to figure it out. And so I think my biggest takeaway from that job, aside from, how to be a social worker, was finding a good mentor that's going to help you and support you and build those skills, that you're not afraid to call and say like, I don't know what I'm doing, I need help. Because she taught me like my foundation of who I am and how I want to be a social worker. So that was my first job out of my master's. From there I went to, and that was very intense. It was like 2 hours a week per family with just the family. I also had to meet with the provider, so about an hour with each different provider. Mind you, this was like, different types of therapy. So rec therapy, art therapy, and then you had your psychiatrist. And then you also had to talk to the schools to make sure that school was going well. So school counselors. And so you're talking to so many people. There are so many moving parts. It was just exhausting. I was underpaid because it's community mental health. So free services comes with the cost. So from there, I just was kind of burnt out and realized I needed to change. And I went to this organization called Girls Inc. And it is primarily doing like different programs for young girls. So anywhere from kinder to high school aged, and then even through college, we would try to take care of the girls going to college and get them set up. And I was in an elementary school for 2 years with that. That was probably my favorite job that I've had so far. But that was before I had my license. So then when I got my license, I was hoping, for more pay, and that was it was a nonprofit, so it just wasn't in the cards. And so I then had to decide, do I want to stay here and do more of like program manager, program director, or do I want to do more clinical work? Because in that job, I was more so working in the classroom, and I was doing some like crisis intervention and some like mental health intervention in the schools, but it was also some just like programming and doing like social emotional lessons for the kids. So at that point, I decided I wanted more clinical work. So then I went to work at a psych hospital, so an inpatient mental health facility. And that was, it was 24/7, 7 days a week. Holidays, you don't get off. I worked 4 10-hour shifts, and I worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And it was, I think, the most, I don't want to say like I learned the most there, because I definitely learned a lot at each stop, but I learned how intense mental health is for a lot of people, because the criteria to get into the hospital to be admitted was you were at risk of harming yourself or someone else. And so all of my patients were either thinking of taking their lives, had tried to take their lives, or, had aggression towards other people. And so, we had people that were into deep psychosis, drug-induced psychosis, bipolar, just everything you can think of. And I think what I learned the most there was empathy, just for humans, because life is hard. And, if you saw someone on the street talking to themselves, or you saw someone out on the street, and they seemed crazy, and I hate that. That's what we equate that to, but that's truly where our mind goes. You might think, the worst, but people have stories, and there's reasons that they are the way they are. And that doesn't mean we can't hold them accountable for their actions, but how can we have empathy to the fact that they're still human beings? And so I think along with the clinical skill set that I learned, it just taught me to, if I can be there for someone in their worst day, I feel like that's my purpose. And how can I, radiate that to try to teach others to be empathetic in a world that's so unempathetic.
Right. Hey, business owners. Are you tired of marketing agencies trying to sell you on their services instead of helping you solve your problems? Yeah, I know the feeling. As they are wont to do, Two Oddballs Creative does things differently. They like to ask themselves what it's like to be in your shoes. They prize personal, customized service over one-size-fits-all approaches, and they treat every project as if it were one for their own business. So if you're ready to be treated with empathy and respect by your marketing agency, you need the Oddballs. You can reach them at twooddballs.com, that's the number 2, oddballs.com, or by phone at 417-986-6332. What if the life you've always wanted was waiting on the other side of one simple question? Why not? At 32 years old, Rustin Pangburn stepped off a bus with nothing but gray sweatpants, a white t-shirt, and a sliver of hope. Released after 60 months of incarceration, he had no safety net, no plan, and no idea how to rebuild the life he'd lost. Yet, step by step, he rewrote his story, proving that even in the darkest of places, transformation is possible. Rustin's book, Mindset Matters, is a raw, honest, and uplifting memoir that blends powerful storytelling with lessons on resilience and self-discovery. For those who have felt stuck, doubted themselves, or wondered if they're defined by their mistakes, this is your call to action. Ask yourself the question that has the power to change everything. Why not? You can find Rustin's book on Amazon by searching Rustin Pangburn, Mindset Matters. His name is spelled RustinPangburn, and the title of that book is Mindset Matters. How do you manage your own mental health when all those stops sound super stressful to me?
Yeah.
How do you manage your own mental health when you're trying to take care of so many others who are at at that level at the hospital? That's high stakes.
A lot of times I don't do it well. I require a lot of grace, but it is hard. There are days where it's like you give all of your mental energy to other people. And so then you get home and it's like my fiance loves to call me on his way home from work and just chat about his day. He works in human resources, so he has got a lot of stories too. But there are days where I'm like, I am just going to listen to my show, my trashy reality television show on my phone while I drive. And so I'll put on, for me, it's Vanderpump Rules. I'll put on Vanderpump Rules, drive, and I've seen it before, so I don't have to watch it. I just kind of listen and zone out. But I'm like, I need to just not talk to anybody. I need to not do anything. But it is hard because as much as, you're trained not to take it home, when you're seeing that much pain in people, it kind of is like this hopeless feeling of life is so freaking hard. And when does it stop being hard? But for me, I think, and everybody's different, but for me, it's finding things that bring me hope. So, my grandma, my dad's dad actually just passed not too long after he was on your podcast. And that was really hard for our family. And then these past few weeks at work have been really hard just with the different behaviors and things with kids that I'm dealing with now. But we have a trip coming up with our friends in Mexico next month, or at the end of this month on the 31st. And so that is kind of how I get away and realize like there are good things and there are happy moments in life. And financially, I'm at the point to where I can do that. I know, early in your career, and even aside from that, it's hard. But just finding those little things, like my nephews, even something as simple as like going to their baseball games, and they get so excited. Coco, did you see that? Did you see that? And so though finding those moments to hold on to, because life's going to be hard, it's inevitable. But for me, it's just finding the joyous, even if it's small.
Yeah, that was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten, was like, yeah, that even if it's small, it's like, look for one little thing. And while you talked, it reminded me of, I think days run together, but I'm pretty sure it was yesterday. My brother and his wife and their daughter came over, and their little kiddo is usually really tentative and stuff, but she has fallen in love with me and my daughter. And so she comes in, and right off the bat, she'll have this grin on her face that's like she's already up to no good, and the door's barely open. And I was having such a hard time this week with like my sleep and everything, and that's been causing issues. And so I was like dead on the couch. But when she came in and I saw that face, I immediately launched into like the playful uncle, and it reminded me, it's like, hey, some of this is like, it's the mental toll taking a physical toll on your body. Yeah. And if you can snap out of that, even for a moment, like those little brief moments of relief are just everything. My daughter's the same way. She can always kind of tell when I'm moving around slower than normal or whatever. And she's always there to pick me up. She calls me, it's playful, but she calls me like dork or a nerd or something. Like she always has something like that. She's got to say. Like this morning, it was, she's over at her mom's this week. She texted, "Good morning to my favorite dork," or something like that. And it's just a text, and my niece was only over for a few minutes, but those brief little moments, and I kind of take those and like try to capture that feeling in the moment. And then later I try to like almost conjure it back up through meditation or whatever. And that's helped so much, like soften my heart.
And it's hard because even, I didn't deal with a lot of depression growing up, but as I've gotten older, and part of me starts to think like, is it the darkness that I'm seeing all the time, that I start to feel myself, and I'm not clinically diagnosed, but I start to feel myself having periods of where I'm like, am I depression? Like, and I need to go talk to someone because I need, therapists need therapists. So, but it's hard because it's like this feeling, and it's so hard to see while you're in it, but it's this feeling of like, when does this stop? And it's really the only way that I can describe it as hopeless. And for me, it's hard because I have for the most of my life been a positive person, and I haven't experienced a ton of depression myself. So now that I'm older, that I've experienced it a lot more, it's like I never felt that. I never understood, and I could be empathetic to it. But now that I've experienced it myself, it's like, really, it just, the only way I can think to describe it is you just feel hopeless. And it's like, you feel like this dark cloud is never going to leave. And so then how do we hang on to those little moments? My nephews, even similar to you, like I love kids because I feel like they're just so pure and they can sense, and they have this like sweetness to them. When my grandma passed, my brother and my sister-in-law, of course, brought them down, and they would see you crying, and they'd come and rub your back or give you a hug or just come stand next to you. And I remember we were in the car on the way home from the first night, and I just like in tears. My poor nephew's probably like, what's going on? But I look at him and I'm just like, thank you. Like Coco really needed, they call me Coco. I'm like, Coco really needed you this weekend. And I didn't know that I needed him. And he probably doesn't even realize what he did. And he probably like doesn't fully comprehend that, but holding on to those moments, it's so hard. But I think that's the only way through, is with that hope of it will be better at times, and at times it will be hard. And there's this thing in mental health and cognitive behavioral therapy called radical acceptance. And so you're not approving of something, you're just kind of accepting it for what it is. And I think I've tried harder to practice that. It's not easy, but it's like there are times where you're going to be depressed and life is going to be hard and you're going to feel hopeless. That just is what it is. How do I learn to live in that? But then accepting, like, there also are times where I'm going to be happy and I'm going to have the joy and I'm going to have the hope. So that's something clinically that has really helped me, is trying to get to that place, because I'm someone who, I overthink things, I stress about things, like even with our house and putting our house up for sale and having people come in for showings and like, oh my God, the room's not clean, I don't have time to clean it fully. And it's like, you worked 13 hours yesterday, it's okay, it is what it is. And again, that's a simplified version because it's much harder and much more complex than that. But it's like trying to use those coping skills to take the deep breaths and to reset and to give those brain patterns a chance to fire and calm me down and say, like, okay, yes, you're going to feel anxious because your house isn't clean and you fully clean and you have people coming to see it. You're going to feel anxious. That's okay. But you're going to get through the day. And tomorrow you'll wake up and maybe you won't feel so anxious. And so I would urge people to kind of look into that. That's something that's helped me, but it's much more complex than I just explained.
Yeah, I've tried to practice that myself. Yeah, this whole week, I think part of why my sleep's messed up is I'm on a new med.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's, waking up off of 3 hours of sleep and like understanding, okay, today is going to be a ton of self-care, and just accept that this is how you're going to feel physically and mentally. But there are things you can do throughout the day to help you feel a little bit better. Like I'd step out in the sunshine for 15 minutes or whatever. But yeah, it's that the hardest part is that acceptance of, yep, this is how I feel. Because it's so hard, because I have such like it's like a fixer's mentality. It's like, oh, I've got to do something to change this. Well, and then it's realizing there's nothing you can do to change it. And then you kind of freak out. But if you just say like, this is how today is going to be. And I don't know if you ever watched The Walking Dead. There's a speech on there that I share all the time. It was with I forget the character's real name, but he was like the king or whatever. He had that like lion with him. There's a speech in there called "And Yet I Smile," and he goes through like all the things that has gone on since the end of the world or whatever. And every time he was like, "And yet I smile, and yet I smile," and I try to bring that to mind all the time when I'm at my worst moments. It's like, you have been here before and you can get out of this if you just accept where you're at right now and do whatever it is that you can to make yourself, not whatever you can do to make yourself feel better, because there's a lot of bad things you can do. But like, I've been to therapy enough. I know a lot of the tools and I understand what works for me. And, meditation is one of those big pieces. And even as long as I've practiced, it's still like, and I'm the same way with going to the gym. It's like, I know that those things are going to make me feel better, but in those moments, it's so hard to get the motivation up to do them.
Yeah. And that's, I think, something important for people to realize is like, it is hard. And I am working with families now, and we meet 2 times a week for an hour. Sometimes it feels like we're doing all this work, but I saw something on TikTok the other day that was like, you meet with your therapist about 1, maybe 2, and sometimes more intense if you're going to intensive therapy, but on average 1 to 2 hours a week. That's 1% of your 7 days, of your 24 hours in those days. So times the 24 hours by 7, and you're spending 1, maybe 2 in a therapy session. So the rest of the work, it's done at home, it's done on your own, but it's hard, exhausting work. So how do we kind of let go of the expectation that, we have to be these like changed people that make all the right decisions and use the coping skills? And, it's hard, and coping skills are preventative. If you're in a crisis, someone telling you to, my dad always says, because, with his PTSD, he had a therapist once tell him to rub his temples. And he's like, how am I going to rub my temples when and it's like, that's preventative. if you're in a crisis, like me telling you to rub your temples or to take a deep breath, it's going to feel silly. And so learning how to use those coping skills and identify like prior to, like if you know you're going into, a depressive episode, that you can start recognizing those signs and doing those things beforehand. But then if you're in it, how do we just get through the day and try to get out of that? Are we reaching out to a friend? Are we, going to the gym if that's what helps? Are we reaching out to, if you have nephews or nieces or grandkids or whoever? Because at that point now it's just survival mode. We've got to get you through that crisis, and then we can try to, hone in on some of those skills again. But it's such a hard process and it feels very repetitive. But it's a cycle, and we've got to just keep going through that cycle until we get to where we need to be.
Yeah, I read something somewhere that how long you have spent before like therapy or like working on yourself matters a whole ton, because your brain has developed these, like, I heard it described as like a ski slope. It's like those paths have been worn in so much that it's going to be very difficult to like layer fresh snow over that and like pick other paths.
And even with my family, like I'm very, very, very privileged to have parents that I can call and say like, hey, when you said this, that hurt my feelings, or when you did this, like I felt this way. But they've done so much work to, break those cycles of the generational trauma and invalidating feelings. And they're by no means perfect. There are days, and I am comfortable talking about it because I feel like as a family, we're kind of open with, our dysfunction and our generational trauma and all of that. But my parents are by no means perfect. I'm sure there are millions of things they would like to go back and do differently. And I know that because they've been open about that. But even with them, my dad did EMDR therapy. He's in CBT right now. Me and my mom are constantly talking about, difficult topics and feelings and things. And even with all of that work, we're still a mess. And we still, aren't where we want to be. So it's like, how do you give yourself some grace to, and I have to remind myself that like my family, we're breaking these cycles truly, and not just like the popular, not because it's popular, not because, that's what social media is telling us, but truly trying to do better and not yell at each other and not go days or weeks or months without talking. But at the end of the day, we're humans and we're flawed, and we're doing what we can, and it's exhausting, but you keep doing it because you don't then want your kids to carry on those same anxieties and anger. But it's hard to break.
I think that's so important, the communication aspect. That's something I just recently talked to my therapist about, especially here lately, how visible some of my struggles have been. I'm like, my daughter must be like, what the heck is going on? But she was like, well, do you talk to her about it? And I'm like, oh yeah, like there's times where, I make a mistake, or, when I get onto her for something and I say, something a little too harsh, and I go back and, I apologize. But there's, the times where I'm, walking around with my head down all the time or whatever. And she's been in therapy ever since me and her mom got divorced. So she understands so much. It's incredible. So I just kind of open up. I'm like, hey, today's going to be a little bit, my anxiety has me pretty tired right now or whatever. And I think that, I wish I could recall exactly what she said, but my therapist said like kids only want to know like three things. It's like that they're going to be taken care of, that everything's going to be all right, and that it's not their fault. So I have been super adamant about, telling her exactly what's going on in the best way that I can, that she can understand, because the last thing I want is for her to walk around and think that she's the problem. But easier said than done. Sometimes it takes a lot to go talk to her about that, because you feel like, I don't know, I always feel like it's kind of messed up that I, that I have to tell her that. But the difference, because everybody's going through stuff, like especially after COVID, like I feel like a lot of people got hit with mental health issues that didn't have them before. And the difference in like being open and like managing expectations and letting her know that it's okay to not be okay every single day, I think sets a better perspective for her moving forward.
Definitely. And I think when we talk about it too, it gives this hope that I'm talking about. It kind of eliminates the feeling that you are alone, even though it feels that way. She's gonna know when she's older, like my dad got through this. Like if she, whether it's depression, anxiety, whether it's a breakup or whatever it is that she's going through, like my dad did this and he talked to me about it. So you know what? Let me call him. He probably has some answers, or even if he doesn't have the answers, he can listen. And that's kind of what my parents have done is they've been open, and I know if I'm having a hard day, I can call them and I don't need them necessarily. My dad will always ask, do you want advice or do you want me to listen? And so sometimes I'm like, I just want to listen and cry and get it out, and but that eliminates that feeling of like I have to do this by myself, because you have people there. And even my sister-in-law, I'm very blessed to have a sister-in-law that I'm close with. So she went to Waynesville also. I was a freshman, she was a sophomore, my brother was a junior. So we kind of all grew up together. And she's one person that like I know no matter what, whatever it is, if I can't call my parents, because sometimes I try not to stress them out, but then I'll call her. Poor girl, I stress her out. I know I stress her out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Sarah. But we always say it always works out. And whether it's good or bad, it always works out. And so I try to lean into that. And that's kind of like that whole theory of radical acceptance of like, it is what it is. It always works out. And so that's kind of a reminder that I give myself is like, it's fine. You got this. Call the people you need to call. It'll work out.
Yeah.
But it's much easier said than done.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received about balancing a passion-driven career with personal life and self-care? Because I think that has to be a huge thing for you.
Yeah, it definitely is. That's a good question. Like I said, my first supervisor was great. And I think honestly, the best thing was give what you have. So if today you only have 30%, if you have PTO saved up and you want to see one client, take the half day. Because I would get to the point where it's like, and even now still, I'm like, I can work late tomorrow and do this. And I know I need to meet with this person. But it's like, if you're showing up and you can't give them your all, that's only, if you're at a 30% today, that's going to bring you to a 5% or maybe even lower. And so just giving what you have. And if you're 100% that day is only 30, take some time off, take the PTO, take a half day. For me, like yesterday was a really long day. I, in between sessions, went and got Bahama Bucks. I love a snow cone. And so I was just having a hard day. And I'm like, why am I stressing? Take a deep breath. Obviously, I'm still going to stress, but I went and got a snow cone. I sat in my car. Nobody was around me. I watched a reality TV show that I've been loving. And I kind of just felt like, okay, I can make it through the second half of the day. Again, I didn't feel perfect, but I gave what I could. I met with my client and it was okay. I made it through. So just giving what you have, even if that's 10% that day, and finding a way to make it work. I think for me, I have to have a flexible job. I can't sit in an office and do therapy for 8 hours of the day. I just know I'm very ADHD. I can't, like, I have to be doing something. So right now I'm doing therapy with families, but it's in their homes. And so my day is a little bit more flexible, because if I'm seeing, one client over here and then the next session's 10-15 minutes away, I know I have that drive time. I know I can stop and get a snow cone or stop and get a drink. So that's kind of how I've done that to keep myself sane. So give what you can and then find what works for you.
I think you've given us a ton of strategies, but I just wanted to ask, like, other than, you talked about calling somebody, the kids in your life, giving you joy, the reality shows, I've picked up that's a huge thing for you.
Yes.
But what kind of traditional strategies or resources do you personally use and recommend to others who experience like loneliness, burnout, or emotional overwhelm?
I think first is realizing that there are physiological sensations that manifest typically first. And so if you can identify those, like for me, if I am, and I say grumpy as like an easier way to understand, but like if I'm grumpy, yesterday I get home, I'm grumpy, I don't want to talk, I'm, kind of just not wanting to do anything. Recognizing that like I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, instead of brushing it under the rug, there are physical sensations that we can identify. If you're someone who's anxious, like your heart's racing, you are probably sweating, your mind is going a million miles an hour, you're overthinking everything. We need to calm those physical sensations down first, because we're not in the side of our brain that is going to be able to make logical decisions and sound decisions and handle, emotions in a way that's healthy. We're in the very emotional side of our brain, which is very reactive, and it isn't the smart side. It's where all those feelings and emotions and impulses are. And so if we can get to the side of our brain that is the smart side, is what I like to say, then we can kind of manage the rest. So a lot of like physical things, so like cold ice water, dipping your face in a bucket of cold ice water, taking a step outside is something that you said earlier. For me, it's big. That's big. And then going from there and kind of figuring out, okay, now that I'm calm, now that I'm more centered, what do I do next? I would say is my biggest thing, because when we think of coping skills, again, it's not in the middle of, like, if you're anxious and you're overwhelmed and your mind's going everywhere and your heart's beating fast, me telling you to color and draw a picture, it may not do much for you. So how can we calm your physical body down to then process the rest? But then you actually have to process what's happened and what's going on, and that can be hard too. But if you can get there, you're one step ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that a lot of people miss is, yeah, I hear about coping strategies nonstop, like on social media, but I don't think that people are picking up that they're getting to that point for a reason. And so that's one of the reasons I started meditating. It was like, okay, I got to quiet everything down and hear what my body is telling me, or, what is bringing up those feelings of anxiety and depression. And unfortunately, sometimes there's nothing. It's a chemical imbalance. But a lot of times, like if I've been doing all right for a long time and then suddenly something has changed and I start having a lot of, like right now, sleeping issues, I've been meditating a lot lately and trying to find what that is. And then obviously going to therapy. That I think that's why that's so huge, is to be able to take that 30,000 foot view from someone else that has a different perspective on what's going on in your life, I think is a huge thing. And also I've been doing a lot of like talking to myself in the second and third person, like narrating my life. I've heard is an effective strategy. Like for example, this morning, I was getting my stuff around to head out and film a YouTube video for a client, and I'm like panicking for some reason, even though this is a client I've worked with for years and we have a really close relationship. And I'm like, he's going to see how tired I am. He's going to ask questions. And there's all these things that I was, going through my mind. And then all of a sudden I just took a step back and was like, Derek's feeling overwhelmed right now. And from there, it just went on. Like I was able to explain to myself like why I was feeling that way. And once I got to that point, it was much easier to manage, and got out, got it done, and now we're here talking. So I made it.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard because our cognitions are part of who we are. Like our thought processes are going to impact the way that we feel and the way that we act and the way that we move in life. So we have to be able to understand how we feel and why, to then move through it. And also understanding like feeling, I always say to every person I work with, I'm like, your feelings are valid. They're always valid. They are your feelings. That is, centered to who you are. They are not always valid. So if I walk in a room and people are staring at me, I may feel like, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. My thoughts are then going to say like, they think I'm weird. There's something in my tooth. Are they judging me? Should I even be here? And I'm going to feel very overwhelmed and anxious and overthinking and all of those things. But and another skill that I really like is just to fact check. Is this a fact or is this a feeling? And I know my feelings are valid. I'm not wrong for feeling like everybody's looking at me. Yeah, I walk in a room and everybody's looking my way, but that may not be fact. They could also just be looking over because the door opened and there's a sound, and it's our natural instinct to look when someone walks in the door. They could be staring at me, and that's okay too. But asking yourself, like, is this fact or is this feeling? And if it's a feeling, why am I feeling that way? And then again, then being able to process it, maybe not in that moment, but maybe, later on with a friend or a therapist or whoever it is. And so I think there's a way to validate our feelings and our emotions, but recognize that they're not always true. And our feelings lie to us, our brains lie to us constantly. If you're feeling scared of something, if you're going down a, roller coaster, yeah, that's scary. But and your mind's telling you, I'm gonna die. If I go on this, I'm gonna die. Is that a fact? Or is that something that your brain is tricking you because our body tries to keep us safe? So if there's a threat, yes, your body is going to try to keep you safe. And those feelings of fear and anxiety, those are primal instincts. We need those in certain situations, but we don't need those on a daily basis if we're trying to have fun at Six Flags with our family. So then fact checking, like, is this fact? Is this feeling? Is this, my body, identifying a threat that's not really a threat? And then that's where all the trauma comes up. And some people live more in that fear and anxiety and fight or flight because that's how they have survived. So if you are in that, to where it's not just anxiety, it's not just overthinking or depression or whatever, and it's trauma, maybe doing like a specialized therapy for that, to where you can really work through that trauma and work through changing those thought patterns and changing the way that your brain functions. But yeah, it's hard. It's a lot. It's a lot of hard work. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wish, like, oh, I just wish it could be easy, but it's not always.
No, it's definitely not. Well, I appreciate you again coming on and talking about all this stuff. I try to get as many professionals on here as I can, but obviously it's pretty hard and they don't want to talk about work outside of work a lot of times. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you giving us, telling us your story and giving us some strategies and giving us a better perspective on our mental health.
Of course, I love to share. I would love to figure out a way to do that, to bring awareness and just an understanding that we're all humans. We all struggle and sharing those real experiences, but it's hard. So I appreciate you doing the podcast and having that space for people to share.